run me through with this and fix it. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for joining. I'm glad you could find the new location. We'll be doing occasional Right Nights here, so next month also. We'll be here. We're very happy to have you join us. So tonight's speaker is Dominic Tanzillo. He's a medical student at Duke, and he has previous experience teaching courses in subjects like virtual reality, which will explain some of the educational focus in his talk tonight. But he'll be talking, Tyler's talking to You Are Not Your Own, and it's a talk about medical ethics, which works really well with our theme for this upcoming issue, which is body and soul. So as you can see from our lovely posters, so we like to have talks that are somewhat centered or tangential to the theme of the next issue. So without further ado, thank you, Dominic.
Thank you. Really excited to see both familiar faces and then lots of new faces here as well, at least to me. Part of, I think, the exciting element of this is that there are a lot of people in medicine here that I recognize, but then also lots of people who aren't in medicine. And I've structured this talk to talk about understanding how medicine works and also diagnosing a little bit at the beginning of why medicine is breaking down. I think there are a lot of people out there who have maybe some concerns or thoughts about the medical field, and so this isn't something that is unique just for medical practitioners to understand. As kind of in this talk, I'm going to also look towards, at the end, of how some of these points are applicable to other fields, education, engineering, again, as time allows. But this is effectively just the way that I think we can all think about our vocations and our lives and how we are trying to do good work and where the barriers to doing good work is in our current lives. As mentioned, I am a medical student and I'm taking a medical ethics course right now. Some of the faculty at Duke are really solid speakers on these topics, and we hope to maybe have them here at a future SNCL Right Night. We'll see as time allows. So without further ado, I'll hop into kind of talking a little bit about medicine as in trouble. This is a talk that could, this topic on its own could span an entire talk, but I just wanted to put this at the beginning to frame a little bit of where a lot of this is coming from. Broadly speaking, there's this crossroads within medicine right now where there's lots of internal debates, lots of questions of what are we doing as doctors, where is medicine heading, which is a kind of an odd question to be asking. You think that medicine as a field should be able to speak to itself and should be obvious of what medicine should be, what good medicine should be. That being said, there's these signs that there is trouble in the field, both kind of internally, rates of burnout, and then growing rates of skepticism or kind of negative relationships between doctors and patients. And so I fundamentally see this as kind of a moral issue, not so much a technocratic or technological issue of people conflicting with a medical system, with new technologies, but a deeper question of medicine losing a sense of what it is as a field. And so that's where I'm going to hop in with talking a little bit about a brief history of medical ethics. Outlined here, there are effectively these large movements and trends in medicine. You have the pre-Hippocratic traditions, where medicine was very contextually based in different cultures. These, span within larger Western European areas, as well as areas from across the globe. But then this has a large formalization process right around 400 BC in Greek. At that time, that's when Hippocrates was on the scene, and then that's where we get this notion of the Hippocratic Oath. If someone here doesn't know anything about medicine, they might recognize the phrase "do no harm," a phrase that is often attributed and associated to the field of medicine and the Hippocratic Oath. That lasts throughout this Greek and then Roman tradition until about the year 400 AD, when it starts to fall away. And we see throughout the medieval Dark Ages, really the Catholic Church is the center of healthcare, really defining it. And that's where a lot of healthcare practices were culturally embedded within the Catholic Church. And then we see the reintroduction of the Hippocratic Oath come right around the 15th century. This is happening, of course, as the church is fractioning in different places, and Europe is, starting the Renaissance and then shortly thereafter the Protestant movements. And I think this is speaking to a desire to return medicine or focus medicine on some sort of practice that isn't necessarily embedded in the church. And so while this may be a return to the the Greek ancients, this is also poses the question of, well, a practice that isn't fundamentally in or part of the church or guided by the church's principle, what does that look like? And it doesn't take too long until we get to the 20th century and we start to see these personalized and private oaths. I think to my medical ceremony, my white coat ceremony in the first week of medical school, where we were all asked in groups of 24 or so students to write a unique oath. And so we are, as a committee of students, deciding, well, what is it that we are pledging to, that we are swearing to? Why are we doing this practice of medicine? And of course, we had this discussion, but ultimately we broke out into small teams and we had like 5 sections within a larger oath. And then we just assumed that the other students kind of understood the same idea. This idea, though, of pluralism or unique independent oaths really moves away from this ancient tradition of pledging yourself to an agreed set of standards and speaks to how increasingly we are spreading out and defining oaths that are personal, that are private, and that aren't necessarily universal or agreed upon. What we see stemming out of these modernized and personal oaths is a need to find a new way of defining ethics rather than appealing to and swearing to Greek gods or other kind of cultural practices. We see actually these principles, or what's called principalism, come out of medicine. And so for those studying for the MCAT or for some sort of medical exam, you might recognize these 4 principles here: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, as things that we're supposed to hold as key guiding principles in an ethical situation. Principalism is essentially a framework where you have these 4 principles that you're trying to balance. In a medical scenario, if you're trying to figure out, something is questionable or something is uncertain, we can see that we are trying to balance between different guiding ideas. This idea was originally forwarded in 1979 in a book called The Principles of Biomedical Ethics. So very, very recent, historically speaking, especially when medicine stretches back millennia. The number one up here is autonomy, and I'll bracket that this is the one that often we are most familiar with. Autonomy is this idea that people ought to be able to decide what they do with their bodies. A really good, sound idea, often coming out of a lot of the problems from early 20th century medical practices, in which people were either experimented on or were subject to medical treatments that they themselves didn't actually want. And so that's like a pretty solid set of ideas. And then these other ones, which are less well defined, but beneficence, doing things for the benefit of patients. Obviously, if you're doing something involved in medicine, you want to help them. Non-maleficence, you shouldn't subject someone to something that has undue harms or overburdensome harms. And so often you're weighing the benefits versus the harms. Think of chemotherapy, where you're giving someone a drug that is fundamentally destructive to the body, but the hope is that it's more destructive to cancer than it is to the rest of the body. And so that's a way that you're benefiting risks and harms. And then this final one of justice, the idea of doing what is fair or reasonable to all people, that all people should be able to access medicine, and that you shouldn't be practicing medicine different for some patients than other patients. That if you know this is the best answer for someone, you shouldn't be holding back for whatever larger reasons. Now, this actually very quickly was recognized as a moving away from these larger ethics and oath-based principles. And so shortly thereafter, this really damning statement came out, which effectively says, we have concluded that the 4-principle approach is so indefinite that it could be used to justify any moral position that one might want to defend, and thus fails to serve as a guide in moral decision-making. Effectively, that the balancing of these different principles doesn't actually posit what is good medicine, what is something that ought to happen. All it's saying is, well, we don't want to violate someone's autonomy. We want to do things for their benefit. We don't want to harm them. But it doesn't actually provide a way of saying what is good or what should be the goal of our work here in the medical field. What this often results in, and this is really the impetus of a lot of this, is that autonomy wins out in complex medical decision making. So if doctors are often talking in the back, as long as it kind of meets basic criteria of having some benefit for someone, not posing undue harms, autonomy is really this issue that will often come out in ethical discussions. Well, is this what the patient wanted? Is this, what their family and the patient has decided as what they ought to do with themselves and with their bodies? And I think that this poses an interesting question of, well, just because someone wants to do it, does it necessarily mean that it's good? You can think of someone who has like desires to harm another individual, if that's an autonomous decision, that's still not a good decision, that still shouldn't be allowed. And so this is where an area where kind of moving away from larger big picture ideas and moving towards this idea of, well, if someone is thinking that they want to do it, it's what should happen, poses a question of how do we respond to this? How do we answer this? And increasingly, this is where we're seeing this larger disconnect in the field of medicine. This idea that if you train and you study and you spend your life towards the vocation of becoming a doctor, are you merely someone who's just going to provide medical services to patients? Is that really the point of it? If it's, as long as it's legal and the patient wants to do it, is that really what medicine should be about? Or this underlying question, do doctors have larger responsibilities to patients, to the field of medicine, to science even, that actually circumscribes more than just autonomy, that, you know, as long as the patient wants it, it's what should happen. And so this has often actually been recently flagged as contributing to that earlier statistic on burnout. Earlier when I said upwards of 50% of doctors today are reporting burnout, and this is writ large in the medical field, these are kind of the larger factors that are contributing to it. Funnily enough, doctors actually report that they themselves don't feel that they have a lot of autonomy, that they may have spent a lot of time towards this vocation, this desire to practice medicine, but oftentimes insurance or larger decisions by a hospital limits what they can do as good or helpful or important medicine. And so what that means is doctors are increasingly feel like cogs in the machine, responding to both demands of the healthcare system and then demands of patients themselves, not really able to exercise clinical judgment. But I think I speak for many doctors that they didn't want to go into the field of medicine just to be a cog in the machine or be effectively an AI chatbot, that someone says, oh, I'm having pain here, what should I do? And then my job is just to prescribe the right antibiotic or the right medication to fix that pain. Really, this is getting at the question then of, okay, if we moved away from these larger trends, these narratives, these Hippocratic oaths, and we've also maybe seeing that there might be some issues with this recent principleless approach, where does that leave medicine? And so the question is then, what is medicine at a fundamental level? And as I move forward through this, I'm going to kind of do something that a child might do, where they ask, okay, what is that for? What is that for? And whenever we hit a new word, we're going to ask, what is the importance of that? Why is this being flagged? So we'll start off with what is medicine. And so if we just appeal to the Oxford English Dictionary, it's the science and the practice of diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of diseases. But of course, that doesn't really understand of why is there debate on what is actually treating or what is good medicine to have things be treated. And so here I've just flagged a lot of areas where there actually is contemporary debate. The first of which here is ethics in cosmetic and reconstructive plastic surgery. Is it medicine for someone who desires a Botox, for example, for purely cosmetic reasons? Is that providing actually medical benefit here? Is that like an end that medicine should be leading towards? Or is that something that because we have the science, because we have the technology, and because patients want it, we're saying, good, we're going to go for this? I think to a lot of talented classmates of mine who will say things along the lines of, I don't necessarily want to do family medicine or work in the areas kind of directly interfacing with patients. I want to go into cosmetic and plastic surgeries to give, because that has better compensation, right? So actually people here are weighing this idea of, well, I'm in this field of medicine, this idea of providing like long-term benefits to someone's health. Well, that might be less important than making personal economic benefits for myself, and I'm going to go into a field which is fundamentally about cosmetics or reconstructive or making someone look better. And there are clear benefits if someone has, for example, burn injuries. This is an area where plastic surgery is phenomenal, where it can be truly life restorative to give someone cosmetic surgery after receiving pretty severe burns. So this isn't for me to say, oh, all of plastic surgery is a fraught field, but instead say, if a lot of talented young doctors are saying, oh, I want to go into this well-compensated plastic surgery and give lots of cosmetic surgeries, that actually is posing a question of what is the ethos of medicine? What is medicine actually working towards? What is the good of medicine? The idea as well, a lot of those Hippocratic oaths that people started to write as personal ones, they started to include aspects focusing on social justice. However, social justice is interesting because there's not a universal agreed upon idea of social justice. In the Catholic tradition, actually, where the concept of social justice first emerged, there is this direct response and care to the poor. And this idea, that initial kind of that fourth principle that I mentioned there of justice can fit with that a lot of doctors might benefit from doing Doctors Without Borders or donating their time to patients who otherwise wouldn't receive medical benefits. If anyone has seen or are familiar with the online personality Mr. Beast, he gave a lot of corrective surgeries for people who are functionally blind. Why is that effective form of medicine that is so kept behind walls from having patients being able to access? But also, if I have a different understanding of social justice than someone else, that can't be a shared principle that we agree on is the emphasis of medicine. Next, the idea of psychiatry and the idea of using pharmacological pills to address psychological issues. Obviously, there are clear areas where antidepressants are very, very helpful. But is the point of medicine to make sure that people are feeling happy? Or are there larger things that medicine should center on? What I'm trying to flag here is that there's this growing scope or this creep where there are many different visions of what medicine should be for, rather than a nice, concise, clean definition of it. This is maybe brought fully to a head where we have these VIP services, these services where you can have doctors that directly serve particular patients, kind of on-call doctors, maybe hearkening back to the family doctors, the rural doctors who would make house visits, but this is almost exclusively afforded to in the field of what is called concierge medicine of typically very, very wealthy individuals who will often ask for or pursue unique, very personalized therapies, sometimes cosmetic, sometimes otherwise, that might not actually have long-term health benefits. But also the idea that we are restricting or limiting some healthcare services only to those who can most afford it. And then finally, an issue that I'll broach at the end here is this idea of physician assisting dying, which one of the people at Duke that I work with wrote this article saying that this is actually the antithesis of medicine. This idea, well, we have the medicine, we have the technologies, can we, morally justify euthanasia or, medicine that facilitates someone dying just because we have, the patient's consenting and for whatever reason they believe that their current life isn't actually a life worth living. That again is framing the idea of, okay, so medicine is increasingly moving in areas more so enabled by science and the availability and the possibilities of science, rather than saying, okay, what should we be doing for the actual well-being of patients and for their health? And so this is kind of the question of where should we limit medicine, or how should we frame the idea of, okay, this is what doctors should do, this is what the healthcare establishment should do, and then this is actually things that the healthcare shouldn't be able to do. And increasingly, because of that debate or because of that emphasis on autonomy, doctors are losing the ability to say, no, actually my conscience says that we shouldn't pursue this kind of medicine. And instead we've really focused on, okay, well, this is something that the person wants, so let's go for it. So that brings me to that next question of asking, okay, what should medicine be for fundamentally? What should be actually the ends or the goals, or in this case, the goods that medicine is focused on? This relates to this idea of teleology or telos. What is the end of this process? And so this is something that I think a lot of us can frame in our own personal vocations, be it in medicine or be it not. What should be the end that we are ultimately pursuing in a field like medicine or in our own personal jobs? This is often assumed, and I think that's where actually the great harms is coming from this. Well, we assume that, and a lot of people will apply to med school, they'll write their essays and say, oh, I want to help people. But actually, what is that end that you're trying to achieve? Because there are many ways of helping people. Why are you doing it in healthcare? Why are you doing it in medicine? What does that actually impact or make you think of what is the larger goal of medicine? And maybe we can open it up to audience participation. Do people have thoughts or ideas of what should be a good or a goal of medicine?
To dignify life.
I love that answer. A good, solid answer to dignify life. I don't know if that's the answer that many people in medicine would automatically assume. Whether or not you agree with it, what do you think other answers that people will say on this topic?
Far would say health.
Far would say health, yes.
What is
Martin
health?
would say flourishing.
absolutely. Human flourishing.
Some people might say, like, reduce suffering.
Yeah, reduce suffering, minimize pain, minimize negative feelings. There are a lot of different areas where this is possible. We are preventing and treating disease, but towards what end? Are some people, increasingly there are people who want to live forever. Do we want to make money for a hospital system? Again, if you're not actually thinking about this and you're just going into the system, you can be influenced and shaped to actually your goal is to maximize profits either for you personally as a doc or for the hospital system. That's often where insurance and those regulations around insurance will force someone to be thinking of. Is it in the area of saving lives, but really for those we deem most important? And that's the idea of justice within medicine, or is it to save everyone's life? And this idea that I love that people were talking about of what is the something more? Because those principles that we mentioned earlier, they're very helpful, but they don't posit what the good or the end of medicine should be. So when it comes to what is good medicine, where ethics is concerned of what is good or what is right, I've thought of kind of some of the goods that you could pursue through the field of medicine. First, which is health, which we'll come back to and we'll probably define, but making sure that the body is functioning well. Is it autonomy? Autonomy actually is a good. We think that people have free will, God gave us free will, and so that actually is a good thing to be able to exercise free will. And then it is truly a good to relieve pain or negative emotions. And so when I mentioned, for example, antidepressants earlier, actually yes, reducing negative feelings and negative emotions are goods that can be achieved. However, having this large scope where there are many different ideas, many different conflicting definitions of what medicine should be doing is fundamentally a problem. And so what I propose here, and referencing Farr Curlin, is that the profession of medicine should be able to commit its members towards the goal, namely of health, and a definition that's not wholesale subject to revision, which is to say we should commit to health, everything else should be circumscribed by health, and that health should be a function and really the goal of medicine. If we start to promote either greater goods or lesser goods, we will lose scope of what should be the goal. So medicine itself should be centered primarily and somewhat exclusively on promoting health. And we can ask what this looks like. It's a simple definition, however, that everyone can agree to. So rather than have different people with their different notions of justice, different notions of reducing negative emotions versus promoting human flourishing, health is a simple definition that many, many people can agree to. Again, the well-functioning, the integrity of the human body. It is narrow enough to justify what ought to happen without being too broad to allow everything to be justified. But then this brings up the question, I've said the word probably 5 or 6 times already, but what is health? Fundamentally, what is health about? Health is a proximate good, and this is where I'll introduce this theological term, this idea that it is a good that enables greater goods. Some things are not necessarily intrinsically good, other than to say, well, health does correctly allow the body to function well, but it's not an ultimate goal, good. It's not the end of our life that we should die perfectly healthy, right? That's not the direction that we should put our lives towards. Those would be ultimate goods. Proximate goods are things that can facilitate that. I mentioned free will earlier. Free will is a good insofar as it allows us to choose the good, right? The larger good that exists out there. However, if you use your free will to choose negative things, to choose bad things, that's actually a use of this facility, of this capacity towards a negative end. And so in that capacity, free will can also be considered a proximate good. It is something that enables a larger good, like human flourishing that was mentioned before. So this is an Orthodox Christian theologian noting that physical health corresponds to the normal state of human nature, and for that very reason, it can be considered a good in and of itself. Because the human animal has a proper way of being constructed, health is a good because it is part of the natural way that the human body should function. However, he continues that health can be evil if it contributes to making a person indifferent to his salvation, keeping him away from God and giving him the false impression that he is self-sufficient, and bestows on him that strength of the flesh which actually weakens rather than giving him that weakness in which God reveals himself, which constitutes true strength. Referencing 2 Corinthians where Paul says, I boast of my weakness, right? Recognizing that his limitations, his human smallness, is what allows him to give right praise to God. Think of that instance that just transpired before St. Paul converted, where he was actually rendered blind. That was actually something God took away his vision, took away an aspect of his health to make him better understand his dependence and his reliance on a larger creator, to take him outside of himself. He was effectively dealing with an ego drama, thinking him almost to be the center or the judge, jury, and executioner of the Jewish faith. And then in losing his vision, he was taken back and was actually made dependent on other people. He was brought to a Christian home, and they gave him the support and the healing necessary for him to actually get outside of himself, after which his sight was returned to him. But this idea that his health was actually potentially something that was taking him away from God is something that's interesting, that the idea that it's a proximate good. And if it's leading us towards negativity, the fact that it leads us towards negativity shows that it can't be an ultimate good. Right? An ultimate good would have to be something that always leads you to bigger and better things, to lead you to a better life. But if you have this health and it enables negative decisions, well, then it can't be the ultimate foundation of one's life. Coming from St. Basil the Great, insofar as it does not render good to those who possess it, it cannot be counted among the things that are good in nature. Right? So saying here quite clearly, quite distinctly, that if it's leading you to sin, it's better to cut off your left hand, right? Something that's antithetical to the integrity of the human body, maybe also, hyperbole as Jesus is saying that there. But it's this idea that, again, if actually your health is leading you away from God, it's not necessarily a good thing in and of itself. But okay, here we're framing that health is the well-functioning of the body. So that begs the question then, okay, so if health is promoting that integrity, maybe we need to ask, what is the body for? And that will finally answer this question of what is medicine, what is good medicine, what is health, what is the body? So what is the body for here? This is, once again, this teleological question. So what is the body for? In the Catholic tradition, the Christian tradition, we actually say it's for the praise and worship of God. Man is the only creature on earth which God willed for itself, and he cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. This is coming from Pope Paul VI, and in one of his encyclicals. And effectively, what can circumscribe this idea is that the purpose of our bodies is to be gift to other people. We might be able to see this first and foremost through Jesus and the Eucharist, where he gave himself bodily for our benefit, for our enrichment. And so there's a clear telos there of what this human body is for. But time and time again throughout the Bible, the whole point that we have these bodies, that we have a soul, a rational soul in a human body, though, is to be able to express our lives as a prayer to God, as an act of love, ultimately to something greater. And so if that's what the body is for, it's for this good, then it quite clearly frames of how health should be functioning in society, what it should be promoting and what it should be enabling. I think just to run this fully circumscribe this thread, and the name of this talk, right, is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so I think this Bible verse here perfectly inscribes this idea of what is the body for, and therefore can answer all these other questions of what is health or what is the right functioning here. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. This idea that even though autonomy was framed initially as this big part and this important part of medicine, autonomy is a little bit of this false notion, right? Autonomos, or self-governance. It's not something that we actually truly have, versus theonomy, or theonomos, governance by God, or acting in accordance with God, might be a better or more helpful understanding of both how to live our lives and even what is the body for. So to put it all together, this teleology of the body here I'm quoting from the Catechism in a few places, but in short, if we are made in the image of God, the human body is precisely because it's animated by a spiritual soul, and is the whole human person that is intended to become, in the body of Christ, a temple of the Spirit. And so here, these these sections of the Catechism are effectively talking about why we have these bodies. We have them to be a temple of the Holy Spirit, and also to give right praise and worship towards God, to orient ourselves towards a higher power. Continues later on that the human body finds perfection in seeking and loving what is true and good. So that again is what we should be using our bodies and ultimately our health for, that if we have the capacity, if we have the ability to live good and healthy lives, how should we orient our lives? What should we be looking towards? We shouldn't necessarily be looking at the things of this world. We should be looking up towards heaven, towards God. And so just structuring it here, this is effectively this proper ordering of the goods, the ends and the goods in medicine. So this is the proximate good, the thing that is good insofar it enables bigger things, which is health. As long as we have physical integrity of the body, that is a good if we are using that for this greater and ultimate good. And so that being love and worship of God, love of neighbors, and right relationship with our neighbors, with ourselves. We need to have a body to be able to exist in relationship with other people. That's the way that we express both our love and our capacity to care for other human beings is through our body, through giving gifts, through hugs, through all these kind of personal connections that is dependent on the body. And so health is a way of maintaining that, maintaining our embeddedness, maintaining ourselves in our communities. And then we have here flagged at this other end, approximate end. These are smaller things. These are mechanisms of achieving or looking at this good. And so I'm flagging here that avoiding pain and negative emotion is a proximate end. That it can be a measure or a metric that we evaluate health by. But again, it's not necessarily all-encompassing or what health is fundamentally about. And I put here Jesus' time in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he is in prayer. He's feeling lots of negative emotions. But reducing those negative emotions, not going to his ultimate sacrifice, would actually be counter to his mission and the mission of his body and of his life. That if in this moment he said, well, I'm feeling negative emotion and I don't want to feel negative emotion, let me run away, we wouldn't have the sacrifice of him. And in that moment he's saying, God, I don't want to bear this cross, let it be lifted to me only if it's in according to your will. So this is flagging that both avoiding pain and negative emotion is a way of measuring health, but it shouldn't necessarily be all-encompassing of health. And in fact, this comes up time and time again in medicine where a patient is weighing whether or not they want to pursue a particular treatment. They might decide that actually for caring for my grandkids or living in the way that I want to live, I might not pursue a chemotherapy. I want to spend the last days of my life with my family rather than being in a hospital bed. And so that again is even saying I might be shirking health for this greater and ultimate good. And so the patient has the ability to make a decision here, exercising autonomy, but saying no to medicine because they care about something greater, something larger, something bigger than themselves rather than just living forever or rather than just integrity of the body. However, the area of medicine should be focused on enabling and promoting health, promoting this integrity of the body and not allowing itself to either be focused on these larger things that are more personal, more up to the individual to decide and almost impossible to force the medical establishment to promote, right? It's really hard for the medical establishment to promote human flourishing because there's 1,000,001 different conceptions and ideas of human flourishing. You can't really mandate that students learn how to have human beings flourish. At the other end, autonomy is only a smaller way of achieving what this person wants for their own health and for their own body. So losing sight of neither, we should be focused on health centrally as kind of the good, the proximate good that the field of medicine can achieve. This is effectively kind of just the summary of these different ways that we structure ultimate goods, and then proximate goals. And my thinking and kind of my thoughts on this medicine system is that it can go awry because we substitute the lesser for the greater. We get the arrangement of goods and ends flipped. And so then rather than saying, oh, the body is for the praise and worshiping God, and so we want to enable the person to best do that with their own health, we actually our lives are about autonomy. We get the end put at the top. And then that's where we get lots of confusion, lots of questions within any field. And shortly I'll be speaking to a few other fields in ways that can go awry. But I want to talk a little bit about the limits of medicine or where we should say, okay, what is good or what is, not good in these different fields. So if we think health is this framework of we can say no to things that we might consider bad for a patient. And so maybe in honor of Brad, I've flagged pain medicine as a really important field. This idea where we want to be able to help patients control their own pain. So if pain is making it worse for a patient to live their life, to walk around, to do the things that are important to them, ranging from going to church to fishing with their grandkids, there is a clear and obvious need to stop that pain, to control that pain. However, if someone is in so much, they just need this constant amount of pain control, think a little bit of the opioid crisis where doctors were overprescribing, giving way too much of these medications, which will make you feel basically painless, will basically make you feel that you can't focus on your pain or you're not thinking about it. They can have lots of negative impacts. Lots of documentaries or studies have come out where doctors were overprescribing it with this idea of, we want to make sure that the patient is feeling well, but we were actually debilitating their capacity to live in community, their capacity to care for others, and their capacities to live well. And so if that's an area where pain medicine needs to be brought in and say, okay, we need to focus on talking with patients about their goals of care, what they want for their life, that's phenomenal. But if we're saying, any amount of pain whatsoever is bad, so we need to always medicate there, that's a real problem. Bringing back to this idea that I flagged earlier of cosmetic surgeries, if a plastic surgery is promoting the well-functioning of an individual, allowing them to live better with their community or even correct issues with regards to their capacity to breathe, or if they have burn and getting a skin graft will allow them to have better health in general, be less prone to infection, or even just be better able to walk amongst their peers without having people stare at them and make them deeply uncomfortable, ostracizing them from community. That's a right and clear good. However, it's promoting vanity, worsening of personal neuroses, or concerns about small cosmetic imperfections. Cosmetic surgery there can actually be considered harmful for the good of those people. If it brings them more into themselves, more into their own personal vanity, and less able to live and care for others, ultimately living and caring for God, then we can actually consider that these surgeries might not be in the people's best interest. This really comes to a head in this notion of medical assistance in dying, sometimes abbreviated MAID, broadly considered euthanasia. The term dying with dignity is often used or brought up to justify this as a deeply humane practice for the good of a patient. However, if we ask the question of what is health and what is health for, we find that this branch of medicine deeply troubling and deeply wanting. Many Catholics know that we are obliged to oppose euthanasia effectively on philosophical or on religious reasons, but with this a definition or idea of health, if the human body is designed to be alive and to be in community, fundamentally ending a life is antithetical to good medicine. It is ending and preventing the capacity for an individual to live and care in community. And we are promoting death. Death being, of course, antithetical to human life. And we even understand this from the notion of original sin, that death actually isn't natural to mankind. We're bringing upon something that is not natural to mankind. And so that way, a lot of advocates or proponents of euthanasia will use terms of, again, dying with dignity, or I don't want to die in this way, I want to have control over my death. Once again, that specter of autonomy raising its head. At the end here, I actually quote from Dr. Gregory House, not often considered a strong moral leader, but I believe it's actually the first episode of the show. When I was doing research for this talk, I found this wonderful clip where he says our bodies break down, sometimes when we're 90, sometimes before we're even born, but it always happens and there's never any dignity in it. You can live with dignity, but we can't die with it. And I think that does actually frame this larger good of human dignity that we often care and report, of human flourishing that we talk so much about in the Catholic tradition, and it frames why medical assistance in dying is so antithetical to good medicine, to what we ought to support, what we ought to care about. And so with that, that's, again, bracketing and showing how this understanding of health and application of medicine can really say, maybe we don't want this form to be something that we promote or encourage in the field of medicine. I also wanted to talk, maybe there are people in teaching here, there are tons of people in education here, and so the next area is, how do we apply the same logic, the same structure to a field like education? Education, once again, going to the Oxford English Dictionary, is the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction, especially at a school or university. But this is purely descriptive. It's not describing what is education for. What goods does education obtain? And once again, I'll invite audience participation. What is the good, or what should education be towards?
From a Catholic viewpoint, I think a moral society, right? A society that holistically can make decisions towards the common good and inculcate them via culture.
Absolutely. Other thoughts or what other people might say?
I would say forming the individual so that way they can recognize and pursue what is true.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The ability to discern truth.
Yeah. And I love all these answers because we're completely sidestepping of what many people would say education is for, right? Is education for just general learning and curiosity? I've talked with many people about this, but Aquinas might actually say no on this issue, where curiosity is in his definition, construed as actually sinful, where you are desiring to learn about things you ought not know about. Think of it as gossip when you're trying to learn someone's secret and you don't have a right to that secret. He juxtaposes that with studiousness, which is actually studying the things you ought to study. So obviously Thomas Aquinas is completely okay with learning and studying, but curiosity he construes as a negative thing. Is it teaching young people how to think? Is it purely for vocational and skills training, as often it's broadly construed nowadays? It makes someone a better, more compliant, or more agreeable worker? Or do you go to school to have a better resume at the end of it so that you can move on to the next thing and build out there or get better grades? Or is it a daycare for children? These are other ways that people have framed and do frame what education is and for. And so we have to ask what should be called education and what we should include in the subject of education. Good education really is about the science, and here we'll go to Aquinas. All the sciences and arts are ordered to a single thing, namely to man's perfection, which is happiness. And this is kind of this larger definition of owing to Aristotle of metanoia, which is like right living, that form of happiness, right? Just or appropriate, dutiful living. And he answers kind of further in the Summa here, where again he talks about pursuing knowledge of truth, which actually in and of itself may be a right or wrong thing. Very similar to health, where pursuing truth might actually be used as a negative thing. One might think someone is studying nuclear physics, and they can either from that create an atomic bomb, or they can create nuclear reactors which generate tremendous amounts of energy for human beings to flourish from. So from the same pursuing of truth or knowledge writ large, you can get two wildly divergent ends. And so once again, this is framing that knowledge, or the acquisition of knowledge, is a proximate good. Generally we think, oh, go to school, get your education, that's a good thing. But again, it has to ask that question, what is that education, what is that knowledge in service of? So pursuing knowledge of truth, strictly speaking, is a good, but it may be evil accidentally by reason of some result, either because one takes pride in knowing the truth, according to 1 Corinthians, knowledge puffeth up, or because one uses the knowledge of truth in order to sin. So, education well ordered does bring individuals closer to their vocations, not just an earthly vocation, though, of working a job, but to this greater, larger vocation that calls one out of oneself. And so the proximate good here in the middle is knowledge, but the greater and ultimate good being knowledge and relationship with God, or training towards your ultimate vocation, living in a just or rightly ordered society, both here on earth and ultimately in heaven. These proximate ends of good grades, or obtaining material benefits from your education, having a better resume, are definitely things that can be pursued and evaluated within the field of education, but it shouldn't actually be one's own focus or good in education. So the education system, whether or not it's Catholic, should be able to agree that knowledge should be the centering ethos for which education exists. I think to right now where I'm a teacher for a lot of students, and a lot of them are using ChatGPT. This is an area, though, where in the syllabus, we didn't say not using ChatGPT. We didn't tell them not to use ChatGPT. And in fact, this is actually an engineering course where more of the focus of the work is actually building a product. And I talk with the students, making sure they're actually learning and they're understanding fundamentally what it's about. And they're learning and applying skills on how to, of new medical procedures, and then how to train others in this medical procedures. This is an area wherein effectively the good or the metric of knowledge is still being conveyed, whether or not they're using ChatGPT here as an issue. And so again, I'm thinking, or I'm framing the way that I'm teaching here is, okay, what is actually the good that I care about? Do I really care that they're using ChatGPT as effectively Google? I actually don't care about that. And as long as they're showing me this application, this knowledge, and they're producing this final end product, this metric of good grades can be evaluating their acquisition of knowledge. But why do I care about this? Well, I care about them learning about it ultimately for them to be better citizens in society, to be able to move closer to their vocations, and to actually enjoy this process of education so that they may be able to use it for the right things. You could think that, again, teaching someone or encouraging someone to pursue education can lead them to more destructive ends, and then we have to be very careful with stewarding and guiding the individuals going into that area. Finally, I'll just bracket it because I know a lot of young adults in this area are engineers. I was once working as an engineer. And engineering is really interesting because it has to do with these constant debates of, well, what is good technology? This new technology is on the horizon. Should we as Catholics be worried about it? What is the good? What is the end here? And once again, Oxford English Dictionary, it's effectively the branch of science and technology about studying how things work and how to operate and how to change things. It's basically the field of man-made and artificial things. As always, we're seeing that engineering, broadly construed, is a good thing, but what is the good in engineering? This is the last time I'll throw it out to the audience for participation. But what do people think is the good of engineering? I don't know. Are there engineers in the room? we got a couple. We got a couple.
I guess I would say creating devices or technology that enable human flourishing to ultimately help them reach knowing and loving God.
I love that answer. It's a beautiful answer. I don't know.
Dignify life again.
Dignify life. It's a great answer because you can't go wrong with that. Because it's an ultimate good, you can always say that's what the purpose of this is for. And once again, making life easier but also better for human beings to be able to flourish. It's not just for finding and solving new problems for the fun of it, nor is it really about building a taller skyscraper, right? Who has the tallest skyscraper in the world right now? Well, we have the better engineers, so therefore, yes, therefore we're winning in some contest. Or is it to increase shareholder value? Again, if you're not questioning these things and you're working for an engineering firm, that can be essentially this like assumed or underlying ethos of your engineering firm. So again, where does it go too far? Or what is good engineering? What is good? The telos here, coming from Pope John Paul II here, technology is undoubtedly proof of man's intelligence, but it must be used at the service of man so that the work may become more humane. And so if we create new technologies, the goal shouldn't be to actually make new work, make busy work for people. Make more emails that people have to respond to because actually it's super easy to have ChatGPT draft up a really, nice, clean email, right? The goal is not to actually have more work for human beings. It should be to alleviate ourselves from difficult work so that we may be able to focus and think about things of God or things greater than ourselves. And so this is a writer for More on Fire saying, new technology makes what was once unthinkable thinkable, but just because something is thinkable does not make it true. And he continues, the reason that so many people are unsatisfied, despairing even in this technological society is because what it reveals is the world to be a lie. Wikipedia and Google make us think that we can acquire knowledge quickly and without toil, but that's not the case. ChatGPT makes us think that we can write well without struggling to find the right words to express something, but that is not the case. Again, showing that this engineering, that this idea of technology, this proximate good of technology, is not necessarily good in and of itself. And nuclear weapons, again, speaks to that. Or here, the rocket program, which facilitated the transfer of nuclear weapons, or the, nuclear deterrence, negative feature, but also has enabled human spaceflight, something that I'm a big booster of and happy to talk about the benefits of space and space research at some point. But engineering well ordered allows individuals to see and give more space in their life to God. That when we have these new technologies, we can save labor, or we can have ways that we can better think and make space for God, rather than consume our attentions with new algorithms that get us addicted to new apps or different apps. And so here I'll just once again lay out this proper ordering of ends and goods, where the proximate good is new technology, bringing about new artificial things that hopefully is ordered to giving glory to God, right? Constructing a beautiful cathedral is rightfully something that technology should be used for. That if you study and you apply technology, it should be creating something grand in this life, but also give more space so that we may better meditate and understand the mind of God. Proximate ends, again, building the bigger skyscraper. Well, Tower of Babel was the first big skyscraper, and we saw how that turned out. Man-made projects shouldn't just be to serve man in that case, or to do away with God. And we see that when we get the ordering flipped, people start to move away from God, replace God with this man-made artifice. And so these things, again, not necessarily a problem. It's not necessarily evil that people are building bigger and bigger buildings, but it's towards how is this ordered. And again, this is hopefully, if nothing else, what you walk away from, this summary slide again, that you should be structuring your life towards understanding and realizing the ultimate goods of both your life, of your vocation, of anything that you do, understanding what are proximate goods, often things that people purport of like, oh, this is intrinsically a good thing, calling that into question. Asking yourself, are these proximate goods of medicine, of technology, of education, are they serving something greater, or are they serving something smaller? Are they serving purely autonomy? Are they serving something along the lines of, building a bigger skyscraper? And just remembering that we need to orient ourselves, always recentering and framing our life that we're thinking about these ultimate goods. And so with that, I'll leave us finally on that meditation from 1 Corinthians once again. Thank you.